In a picturesque valley, nestled amidst majestic mountains and crystal-clear rivers, lay the village where Freya was born. From early childhood, she stood out among her peers. Her eyes, the color of spring foliage, reflected the serenity of the surrounding fields, yet within her soul dwelled an untamed spirit of adventure, contrasting sharply with the tranquil valley life. As the daughter of a blacksmith and a healer, Freya grew up surrounded by the clang of the hammer and the scent of medicinal herbs. By the age of 6, she was already helping her mother prepare remedies, all while listening to the epic tales recounted by the elders around the campfire. As Freya grew older, she increasingly pondered the world beyond the mountains. Driven by curiosity and fearlessness, she scaled mountain peaks to survey the horizon. One day, during such an exploration, she discovered an ancient rune carved into stone, which her mother interpreted as a sign from the gods. From that moment, Freya began to pursue knowledge and strength. By day, she honed her archery skills under her father's guidance, and by night, she unraveled the mysteries of the runes with her mother. By the age of 13, Freya was renowned for her intellect and skill. She was often seen leading children's games, mimicking battles, or exploring nearby caves, always wearing a necklace with a runic stone that served as her protective charm. Yet even amidst this vibrant energy, she sensed a greater destiny awaited her, one she couldn't yet grasp, but that beckoned her, softly and persistently, like the whisper of the wind in the mountains. Among the many stories Freya heard around the campfire, the legend of the Valkyries, celestial warrior maidens chosen by the gods, stood out. It was said they rode across the sky on winged steeds, determining the fate of those fallen in battle and carrying the most valiant to Valhalla, the hall of warriors, where feasts and glory awaited them. For Freya, the Valkyries were not mere mythical figures, but the embodiment of strength, courage, and wisdom, everything she aspired to be. One night, as the campfire crackled and an icy wind swept through the valley, Freya asked the village elder to recount the story of Brunhilde, one of the bravest Valkyries. The elder told how Brunhilde dared to defy the gods for justice and was banished to the mortal world. Freya saw this not as punishment, but as an act of unparalleled bravery. Inspired, she began to emulate the Valkyries, secretly carving wooden figures and staging miniature battles. Despite her young age, Freya's heart burned with the desire to become more than just an ordinary girl. While her peers dreamed of festivals and marriage, Freya secretly trained and carved runes onto her arrowheads, dedicating them to the Valkyries. She believed that the heavens would one day open a path for her, as it had for the legendary heroines. But even in her dreams and fantasies, Freya felt that the Valkyries held secrets she had yet to uncover. In the harsh lands of the north, where icy winds foretold death, a single name, Hrothgar, made even the bravest tremble. Nicknamed the Soul Binder, he was not merely a warrior, but a ruthless force whose army swept through villages, sowing terror and destruction. Unlike other warlords who sought only plunder, Hrothgar adhered to a brutal strategy. He seized the finest warriors from each village, bending them to his will, and left behind only ashes and lamentations. Hrothgar was a man of immense stature, his face disfigured by a scar that seemed to tell the story of 1,000 battles. He believed that an army's strength lay not in its numbers, but in the quality of its warriors, meticulously selecting each fighter. Those who resisted or proved unworthy, he mercilessly annihilated, leaving their bodies as a warning to the survivors. His goal was clear: to forge the most powerful army the North had ever seen, capable of breaking not only resistance, but also the spirit of anyone who dared to oppose him. However, his strategies were not limited to brute force. Hrothgar employed spies and saboteurs to destabilize villages before an attack, sowing discord among local chieftains. On one occasion, he sent a captured warrior back to his village with a single message: submit or perish. The result was immediate capitulation, sparing his troops a direct confrontation. Despite the widespread fear and hatred, Hrothgar's military genius commanded a strange respect. Yet, even he understood that his relentless advance was attracting forces his army might not be able to contend with. From a hilltop, Hrothgar gazed down upon Freya as his village, studying every detail like a predator preparing to strike. The faint torchlight and muffled voices indicated that the inhabitants were unaware of the looming threat. Beside him, his commanders stood silently, awaiting his instructions. Hrothgar understood that this village was no ordinary prey. Even from a distance, he sensed that it might harbor warriors worthy of joining his army. The invasion had to be swift, precise, and devastating. Strength lay not only in dominance, but also in the realization that resistance was futile. As night fell, he observed the men and women patrolling the village outskirts. A slight smile touched his lips as he noted the warriors' discipline and readiness. "Interesting," he murmured to his chief strategist. "Let's give them a chance to prove themselves." Orders, like a cold wind foretelling a storm, began to be whispered. Each unit was assigned a specific task. One group was to create a diversion at the main entrance, another to encircle the flanks, and a third, Hrothgar's elite, to capture the best fighters before they could organize an effective defense. The troops moved like shadows among the trees, remaining invisible to the unwary eye. Hrothgar stood at the center, coordinating everything with military precision. He knew that the success of his campaigns depended on absolute control over every detail. As the siege tightened, he raised his hand, signaling a final pause before the assault. "By the time the first cry rings out," he declared, "I want the village in our hands." There was something almost ritualistic in that moment, as if Hrothgar was once again seizing fate into his own hands. What awaited the village and its inhabitants? Could Freya stand against the impending threat? The answers to these questions lay hidden behind the veil of unfolding events. The serenity of the pre-dawn silence was shattered by the thunderous crash of collapsing gates. The invasion began with such ferocity that Freya's peaceful village was plunged into a state of stunned paralysis. Hrothgar's warriors descended like demons from the night, sowing chaos with their deadly blades and relentless brutality. Fire instantly engulfed the wooden structures, casting sinister reflections on the terrified faces of the settlers. Young Freya, barely 15, watched in horror as the tragedy unfolded, standing beside her father. The veteran, gripping his sword and shield, was ready to desperately defend his family. His gaze, fixed on his daughter, was filled with sorrow and determination, as if he sought to etch into her memory a lesson in courage in the face of imminent doom. Amidst the general chaos, Hrothgar himself appeared, towering like a colossal statue, clad in gleaming armor. In his hand, he gripped an axe that seemed capable of cleaving the heavens. He advanced with chilling composure, his gaze assessing each warrior as if selecting precious diamonds from a pile of ordinary stones. When his warriors met fierce resistance, Hrothgar personally plunged into the fray, ruthlessly crushing defenders with calculated efficiency. In the heat of battle, his gaze suddenly fell upon Freya, standing in the middle of a narrow street. Her eyes were wide with terror, and she clutched a dagger convulsively, more instinctively than skillfully. Something in her gaze made Hrothgar pause for a moment, perhaps the fire of defiance burning in her eyes, so rare amidst the universal despair. Hrothgar stepped forward, raising his axe with clear intent. At that instant, Freya's father, like lightning, darted forward, shielding his daughter with his shield. "Run, Freya!" he cried, but his voice was swallowed by the roar of flames and the shouts of the combatants. The girl hesitated for a moment, but her father's resolute gaze left her no choice. Freya turned and ran, tears stinging her cheeks as the sounds of battle gradually faded. The uneven forest path cut her feet, but she continued to run, driven only by the instinct of self-preservation. When she finally stopped, gasping in the embrace of the night's darkness and silence, Freya realized that her old life was forever in the past. The terrifying sound of approaching hooves distinctly reached Freya. Ears, her lungs burned with exertion, but panicked fear propelled her forward, not allowing her to look back. She knew she couldn't stop, couldn't allow herself to be caught. The wind whipped fiercely at her face, and the villagers' cries, mixed with the din of battle, seemed to gradually fade into the depths of the forest. But the thud of hooves grew closer and closer, an unmistakable sign of a pursuit organized by an army determined to capture her. When the noise became unbearably loud, Freya, unable to bear it, glanced over her shoulder and saw the silhouettes of riders piercing the night, gaining on her with every second. Freya's heart pounded wildly in her chest. She understood that if caught, her fate would be similar to that of a people, a life of slavery, or worse, an inglorious death. Her legs felt like lead. Tree branches painfully scratched her body, but as the pursuit closed in, the pressure in her chest intensified. The young warrior felt time was inexorably running out, and her only chance was to run faster, run further. It was at this moment, when her strength was failing, that she heard a distant voice. Not human, but something almost ethereal, which seemed to echo among the trees. Suddenly, the wind shifted, and from behind a veil of mist, 3 majestic figures descended from the heavens, mounted on mighty steeds, like a flash of light in utter darkness. The Valkyries, imposing and beautiful, appeared before her in all their splendor. Their armor glowed with an otherworldly power that made the air around them seem to vibrate. They moved with astonishing speed, cutting through the air like sharp blades. The 5 knights pursuing Freya had no time to react. Before they could even draw their blades or rein in their horses, the Valkyries descended upon them with lethal precision. Every strike was fatal, every movement an embodiment of the agility and divine power they possessed. In the blink of an eye, Hrothgar's warriors were vanquished, collapsing lifelessly onto the forest floor, while the Valkyries remained standing, unyielding and vigilant. Freya, her heart pounding wildly, looked at her saviors and, for the first time since the tragedy began, felt a faint ray of hope. Freya was still in a state of profound shock, her mind desperately trying to comprehend the events that had unfolded. The bodies of the fallen warriors lay at her feet, but it was the appearance of the Valkyries that struck her most. They were unlike anything she had ever seen, so powerful, yet possessing an ethereal grace in their movements that made them almost mystical beings. One of them, the youngest, with hair as golden as sunlight, dismounted her steed and approached Freya with firm yet gentle steps. She knelt before the young warrior, her sky-blue eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. "You are safe now," the Valkyrie said, her voice soft but full of power. "Do not be afraid, Freya. We did not appear here by chance. There is something within you that others do not see. What you found in the forest, that rune, it is a clear sign. You are chosen." Freya, still breathless with emotion, couldn't fully grasp the meaning of the words, but the Valkyrie's gaze left no room for doubt. "This rune," the Valkyrie continued, "is a symbol of great power. It signifies that you are destined to become one of us, a guardian of balance, a protector of your brothers and sisters, one who will bring harmony and prosperity to these lands." Freya, her heart pounding wildly in her chest, finally took a deep breath and looked at the rune clutched in her hand. It was a sign she had never seen before, but as she looked closer, something within her seemed to ignite. It was as if this symbol had always been there, simply waiting for its moment. The Valkyrie slowly rose to her feet, and her 2 companions followed suit. "Come with us," the Valkyrie offered, extending her hand. "The island needs you, and your destiny extends far beyond anything you could have imagined. Prepare yourself, Freya. The path will not be easy, but you are no longer alone." Freya looked up at the sky, strewn with twinkling stars, and without hesitation reached out her hand in return. Together, they mounted their steeds and rode into the unknown, where Freya's true journey was about to begin. Engulfed by a whirlwind of conflicting emotions, Freya followed the three Valkyries to their abode. The journey seemed endless, and the words of the eldest warrior echoed in her mind. "You are chosen." Upon finally arriving at the Valkyries' sanctuary, the girl paused in anticipation. The majestic place was striking with its tall stone walls, surrounded by an impenetrable forest. The very atmosphere was permeated with magic, and the weight of past eras could be felt with every step. The Valkyries led her inside, where a crackling fireplace in a spacious hall created an atmosphere of comfort and warmth. However, despite the apparent safety, Freya couldn't hold back her tears. Loneliness and pain overwhelmed her. Memories of her destroyed village, her father's sacrifice, and the uncertainty of the future tormented her soul. One of the Valkyries, the wisest and most experienced, approached and gently touched the young maiden's shoulder. "Let your tears flow, Freya," she said softly. "Release your pain. Here you can be vulnerable. But remember, strength always follows tears. The burden you are destined to carry is far greater than any tragedy." For the first time in weeks, Freya allowed herself to weep, unafraid of judgment, unafraid that her weakness would be perceived as defeat. A few days later, Freya felt a surge of strength, though doubts about her ability to fulfill her destined fate still lingered. On the seventh morning, the Valkyries began her training, starting with control over her mind and soul. They taught her deep breathing, thought concentration, and the management of her inner power. "You are a guardian of balance," instructed the youngest Valkyrie. "To become a true Valkyrie, you must learn to control your energy not only physically, but also spiritually. Only by calming your spirit will you be able to wield the sword of truth." The training was grueling, but Freya, with a renewed heart and enlightened mind, began to discover a previously unknown power within herself. The weight of destiny gradually transformed into something greater. The future depended solely on her decisions. The following 3 years became a period of intense training and spiritual transformation. Freya, a young girl with a kind heart and a wounded soul, evolved from a simple peasant, tormented by grief and fear, into a fearless and disciplined warrior. The teachings were continuous, without respite, but over time, Freya began to comprehend the immense responsibility placed upon her, the purpose for which she was called to become a Valkyrie. Each day offered a new opportunity to surpass herself, and the young warrior dedicated herself to this process with the full strength of her being. In the initial months, she was taught to control her body and mind. The Valkyries understood that Freya's main challenge would be harmonizing her emotions with her strength, as she was driven by a desire for vengeance and justice. She had to learn to channel these feelings wisely. Physical training included rigorous martial arts, from fencing to archery. Freya excelled in agility and accuracy, but most importantly, she learned to curb the fear, anger, and hatred that sometimes threatened to erupt. Every strike, every movement was accompanied by deep contemplation on what it meant to be a protector not only of her village but of the entire island. However, Freya's true mastery was not limited to physical training. The Valkyries understood that true power required wisdom that surpassed brute strength. Therefore, Freya spent long hours studying the Valkyries' ancient sacred texts, which narrated the laws of fate, the forces governing life and death, and the balance between good and evil. She was taught to see the world not only with her eyes, but also with her heart and mind. The Valkyries, in their wisdom, knew that Freya needed to become a strategist, to understand the intricacies of human relationships, and to possess a vision extending beyond the battlefield. During this time, she learned not merely to react, but to think, which would prove crucial when facing enemies superior in strength. As she matured, Freya became more than just a warrior. She became a symbol, a Valkyrie embodying the hope, redemption, and strength of her island's people. Her swordsmanship was undeniable, but her mind grew even sharper. She realized that the real battle she was destined to face would not be against external foes, but against fate itself, against the necessity of shaping the future rather than merely accepting it. Throughout these 3 years, Freya had to confront her fears and traumas, working with the more experienced Valkyries to understand what it truly meant to be a protector of her people. As the Oracle had foretold, she was the key to establishing peace on the island. Now she deeply understood that her mission was not to shed blood, but to restore peace, save the innocent, and break the vicious cycle of violence that had gripped these lands. After 3 years of diligent training, the Valkyries reached a unanimous conclusion. Freya had reached the pinnacle of her mastery. She had transformed into a formidable warrior and leader, embodying wisdom, spiritual strength, and unwavering resolve, qualities essential for every Valkyrie. One night, amidst an intense training session, the 3 elder Valkyries summoned her to the central hall of their abode. The flames dancing in the massive fireplace cast reflections on their solemn faces. "The time has come, Freya," said the most experienced Valkyrie, her voice deep and calm. "You are ready for the true battle, for the fulfillment of the destiny foretold for you. Your mission begins now." Freya met the gaze of each Valkyrie, feeling the weight of their words. She realized that her path was not merely vengeance, but something far greater. She had become a symbol of hope for the entire island. With renewed determination, she took up her sword and prepared for the most crucial mission of her life, understanding that she would face not only physical enemies, but also challenges arising from the very heart of her homeland. Her purpose was clear, and she was ready to overcome any obstacles. During Freya's training with the Valkyries, the island she loved so dearly lived under constant tension. The shadow of Hrothgar, the ruthless conqueror, loomed over its once prosperous lands. He was not content with merely plundering villages. His ambitions stretched far beyond. Hrothgar seized territories, enslaved populations, and forged a formidable, seemingly invincible army. With each victory, his power grew, but his true objective was more ambitious than simple dominance. He aimed for complete control over the island. At the heart of the island, like an ominous symbol of his dominion, stood the Iron Castle, Hrothgar's citadel. Its dark stone walls and iron towers, piercing the sky, served as a grim reminder of his quest for absolute power. The castle was not merely a military fortress, but the nerve center of his empire, where he planned every assault, every strategic move. Guarded by hordes of fierce warriors and managed by trusted advisors, the castle grew increasingly impregnable with each passing day. Its power extended not only over territory, but also over the minds of his enemies, instilling terror in those who dared to defy him. In the villages and among the island's warriors, gripped by fear of Hrothgar's might, a sense of despair grew. Many fled to the mountains or hid in the forests, and only a few retained the courage to openly resist. Villages fell, one after another, expanding Hrothgar's dominion. He skillfully employed tactics of psychological warfare, striking suddenly and making his enemies dread the inevitable. His army, composed of ravaged and conscripted warriors, became increasingly lethal, and the castle, transformed into an impregnable fortress, was a place where death and fear permeated every corridor. However, far from this deepening gloom, Freya and the Valkyries continued to prepare for the inevitable confrontation. News of Hrothgar's rise reached them, but Freya's training was driven by a higher purpose. She felt that her efforts were not in vain, that at the right moment, the light of resistance would break through the darkness enveloping the island, and that moment was drawing near. As Freya set out, she understood that the battle for the island's liberation would not be easy, but she would not allow vengeance to consume her. Her goal was something greater, to bring the peace the island so desperately needed, even if it meant confronting Hrothgar himself. She felt that to restore harmony, the tyrant tormenting these lands had to be crushed. Her mission began with the first village seized by Hrothgar's forces. The scene that met her eyes was horrifying. Ruined homes, ground stained with the blood of fallen warriors. The inhabitants were subdued and terrified. Only a few retained a glimmer of hope. Freya understood that the path to peace began not with battle, but with a symbolic act. Using her skills, she infiltrated enemy lines, eliminating patrols with the precision of an experienced warrior. Her movements were swift and confident, and soon the village was liberated from the grasp of the invaders. After liberating the village, Freya headed to the central square, where the inhabitants, relieved but still disbelieving, had gathered. With firmness in her voice, Freya approached a surviving soldier from Hrothgar's army and ordered him to go to other villages. "Rise and run to the others," Freya declared, her voice filled with strength and hope. "Tell them that peace is near. Tell them that, despite the hardships, the island's future will be restored." The soldier, initially resistant, finally understood the message Freya carried in her heart. He set off, determined to spread the news of resistance and freedom across the island, starting with the nearest village. Having completed her mission, Freya looked at the horizon, feeling the weight of responsibility resting on her shoulders. She knew this was only the beginning, that the path would be long and arduous, and she would have to face forces superior to her own. But the flame of hope had been rekindled in the villages, and Freya was ready to move forward, knowing that her journey had only just begun. After a month of fierce battles, Freya had liberated several villages from Hrothgar's oppression. Tales of her exploits, growing into legends, spread across the island, transforming her into a symbol of hope and courage. In every liberated village, Freya was welcomed as a savior, granting new life and faith in the future. However, the path to freedom was fraught with difficulties. Each clash with Hrothgar's warriors turned into a brutal fight to the death, but Freya, hardened by the rigorous training of the Valkyries, displayed unwavering resilience. With each victory, the number of villages ready to rally under her banner grew. News of Freya's audacious strikes reached Hrothgar, fueling the flames of his arrogance. Reports of liberated settlements and Freya's growing influence, becoming the embodiment of resistance, did not alarm him. On the contrary, his self-assurance only strengthened. "She is merely a weak shadow of me," Hrothgar arrogantly mused, not taking seriously the threat posed by the young warrior. His empire was growing stronger, and he was convinced of his invincibility. The thought of defeat at Freya's hands seemed absurd to him, and his immense pride blinded him, preventing him from seeing the real danger. In one of the fierce battles, Freya managed to obtain valuable information. A captured soldier, trembling with fear, reported that Hrothgar had concentrated his main forces in the impregnable Castle Carold, towering on a northern mountain. This news ignited a fire of determination in Freya's heart. She understood that a decisive confrontation with the tyrant was inevitable, and now he was within reach. However, before rushing into battle, she realized the need for wisdom, for knowledge inaccessible to mortals, for revelations that only the Valkyries could bestow. Freya decided to journey to Mount Nor, the legendary abode of the Norns, who spun the threads of fate. It was believed they possessed the gift of foresight, and could reveal paths hidden from mortal eyes. The journey to the mountain promised to be arduous, but Freya believed that meeting the Norns would help her gain the knowledge necessary for a final victory over Hrothgar and the establishment of peace on the island. As she ventured north, the icy winds grew stronger, as if fate itself was testing her resolve. But Freya did not falter. The mountain's silence beckoned her, and she felt that its depths held the answers to all her questions. Overcoming all obstacles, Freya reached Mount Nor, where the harsh wind whispered ancient secrets. The air was permeated with cold and a sense of eternity, as if time itself bowed before the grandeur of the Norns. The stones around her emanated a mystical glow, incomprehensible to the human mind. Entering the temple of the Norns, Freya felt a sense of awe and a surge of power. This place resembled an ancient sanctuary where the currents of destiny flowed visibly, woven by unseen hands. In the center of the temple, in solemn silence, the Norns awaited her. 3 majestic figures, whose eyes reflected the universe itself, gazed at Freya with wisdom surpassing all earthly knowledge. Freya's fate, like that of all living beings, was intertwined with the invisible threads of life and death, and the Norns knew perfectly well what she sought. Freya approached them, feeling a chill run down her spine. She understood that the coming moment would bring answers, but could also change her life forever. "Are you ready to hear your fate?" asked the first Norn, her voice echoing through the temple. The other 2 Norns watched silently, as if words were unnecessary. Freya's heart pounded wildly, and her mind was filled with questions. She nodded in assent. "Do you wish to know how to defeat your enemy, or would you prefer to understand your role in the great cycle of life?" asked the third Norn. In the ensuing silence, Freya realized that her answer would determine her future path. Finally, she spoke, her voice firm and respectful. "I want to know how to defeat Hrothgar and save my land." The Norns exchanged silent glances, and one of them raised her hands, uttering ancient words of power. The air around Freya vibrated, as if something invisible was being born. In that moment, her destiny was being decided. With a gentle touch, one of the Norns touched Freya's forehead, and a wave of energy surged through her body. Freya felt a deep connection to the very fabric of reality. She understood that the upcoming battle would not merely be a physical confrontation, but a struggle against the forces governing the destinies of all existence. At the same time, she felt a surge of new strength that would guide her in her hour of need. The silent gazes of the Norns conveyed their blessing. "Within you lies the power to alter the course of history. But remember, maiden, that true strength is not in your hands, but in how you wield it," one of them declared, her words deeply imprinted on Freya's soul. "Such is the destiny foretold for you," added another. To conclude, the third Norn enveloped Freya in a golden light, imbuing her with ancient power, the very power carried by the Valkyries, capable of crushing any foe. Freya, feeling the weight of her great destiny, thanked the Norns. She understood that her journey had reached a turning point. As she turned to leave, she felt the weather shift. The mountains grew quieter. Despite the gravity of the knowledge she had received, Freya was ready for the next step. It was time to strike at Hrothgar and his empire, and she prepared to do so with the full might of a Valkyrie. Her heart was filled with resolve, and the Norn's blessing illuminated her path to ultimate victory. On the night preceding the assault on Hrothgar's castle, the atmosphere was permeated with chilling silence, and the sky was burdened with dark clouds, as if striving to press down upon the earth. Freya, standing tall in an open field, gazed upon the formidable castle walls that loomed in the distance like dark giants. Lights flickering in the tower windows resembled vigilant eyes watching the horizon. She realized that the impending event would be the culmination, the final battle determining the fate of the island and its inhabitants. Despite her inner calm, the burden of responsibility weighed heavily on her shoulders. Freya did not seek vengeance, but she understood that to establish peace, victory over Hrothgar was inevitable. Feeling the Norn's blessing, she sensed a power within her that transcended physical capabilities. Masterfully wielding her blade, she watched as the steel reflected the timid moonlight piercing through the clouds. Shoulder to shoulder with her stood the Valkyries, ready for battle, their armor radiating a silvery gleam and their eyes burning with resolve. The assault was planned with flawless precision, and soon Hrothgar's patrols detected the presence of Freya and her forces. The castle gates swung open, and the first enemy warriors advanced to meet them. But Freya did not flinch. Her sword cleaved the air with lightning speed, striking down foes with merciless accuracy. The battle intensified as Freya and her army advanced toward the castle. Despite their good training, Hrothgar's forces proved powerless against the might of the Valkyries. Every movement Freya made reflected her soul, for she was connected to something greater than mere warfare. Swords clashed with a deafening clang, and the flames of campfires illuminated the battlefield, but Freya kept her gaze fixed on her objective. The castle, now fully engulfed in battle, would be the final stage of her journey. She knew that a confrontation with Hrothgar was inevitable, and this thought imbued her with even greater strength. Reaching the base of the great tower, Freya saw Hrothgar before her, imposing and filled with bestial hatred. His eyes, like two bottomless wells, exuded the fury of a man realizing his final battle was at hand. He charged forward, gripping a heavy axe, but Freya did not retreat. She remembered her mission and knew she had to prove to everyone that peace could be stronger than war. The battle between them was fierce. Hrothgar tried to crush Freya with brute force, but she moved with grace and precision, dodging and striking with calculated power. In the midst of the confrontation, Freya felt the power of the Valkyries fill her veins, and the will of the Norns guided her every move. Finally, with a fierce cry, Freya disarmed Hrothgar and brought him to the ground, the blade of her sword reflecting the light of victory. Hrothgar was defeated. The villain who had caused so much suffering now lay at Freya's feet, and the island breathed a sigh of relief. Freya did not kill him, for her goal was not destruction, but liberation. She handed him over to her people, who were to send him into exile far from the island. The war had ended, and with Hrothgar's fall, long-awaited peace finally reigned. The enemy forces dispersed like leaves driven by the wind, and the villagers at last found freedom. Freya gazed at the horizon, at the mountains surrounding the island, and in that moment realized her destiny was fulfilled. She had saved her land and secured peace, but more importantly, she had shown everyone that true strength lies not in brute force, but in the courage, heart, and wisdom to fight for the common good. The Valkyries stood by her side, and the people honored her as a leader who, beyond being a warrior, had become a harbinger of a new era. The battle against Hrothgar marked the end of a dark age and the beginning of an era of peace, prosperity, and wisdom for all the island's inhabitants. Thus, the story of Freya, the Chosen One, spread across all lands, becoming a legend passed down through generations, immortalized in the hearts of the people.